He has a nose that tries to find what's really going on beneath the surface of things, which is what all really good directors try to find and do. But he has this added marvelous advantage of being an extraordinarily gifted writer. So he brings all of those to the table, and that's a formidable package. I mean, a great deal of intelligence, a high skill and talent as a writer, terrific perception about human behavior, and his own musical sense. All of those things, I think, contribute to what he does.
The only part of the casting of the English Patient in which there was no discussion, no determination, and no meeting was I sent the book to Juliette Binoche and said, please play this part, because that was just serving my own absolute kind of obsession with Juliette, because I just thought, well, I saw her in Unbearable Lightness of Being, I saw her in Kieślowski's Blue, and in the way that I think every member of every film audience will understand the truth of this, is that a wonderful performer, a wonderful actor makes you desire them, not in the sense of wanting to have them as people, but to desire somehow to be in their lives, or to know them, or to be friends with them, or to possess them in some odd way. You want to meet Hugh Grant, or you want to meet Harrison Ford. You just feel like you know them and that they're your intimate. And I think that when I saw Juliette in The Unbearable Lightness of Being, I just thought, I want to be in the same world as this person. I want to know them. And so, because Saul had worked with her, I just shamelessly wrote a note with the book saying, please be in our film. And then had this very odd thing where she read the screenplay and said she wanted to have to go and meet somebody I'd never met, but I had very strong ideas about who they were. And it's, again, one of those wonderful situations where the meeting and knowing of her was more glorious than the expectation, whereas unfortunately it's often the reverse.
My darling, I'm waiting for you. How long is the day in the dark? Or a week? The fire is gone now. And I'm horribly cold.
I really ought to drag myself outside, but then there'd be the sun. I'm afraid I waste the light on the paintings and on writing these words. We die.
We die. We die rich with lovers and tribes. Tastes we have swallowed. Bodies we have entered and swum up like rivers.
Fears we've hidden in, like this wretched cave.
I've seen The English Patient once since I made it, which was to do the commentary. And I don't imagine ever watching it again, because I think that in purgatory we'll be forced to sit and watch every frame of every film we've ever made, and that will be our punishment for inflicting it on audiences. It will be inflicted upon us for the rest of our lives. And so I'm not familiar anymore in a real sense with any scene of any film that I've made. I do know that when we were shooting The English Patient, there were many moments where I felt very privileged to be around actors, and I would. In some ways, it's sort of derelict, because I don't want to say, well, I preferred that moment, I preferred that. Largely, the witnessing of great work from Rafe and from Kristen and from Juliette, sort of. I loved the moment, for instance, in the Christmas party, where Rafe is so desperate to be with Kristen, and he calls her into this back room, and they're making love while Christmas carols are going on. So there's a sort of, again, when we talked earlier about this relationship between the public and the private. There's a perfect example of a scene in which the public has to infiltrate the private and vice versa. And there's a sort of sequence there where Kristen's husband, Colin Firth, shows up afterwards dressed up as Santa Claus with his own agenda, and it's the film is all sort of melding together in quite an interesting way. And there is a very two odd things that happened in that sequence. One of them is that it's so typical of filmmaking, is that when we were discussing setting up this sequence, I'd said, well, I want about 350 British soldiers to be in the scene because it's a Christmas party for the British in Egypt, and they said, yeah, 350. The location production manager write down these numbers, and then the next time around they said, you wanted 200 extras for that scene? You say, no, 350. They said, so well, we can do maybe 175 English soldiers. And you say, okay. The next time they come and say, you know the 100 soldiers that you want for the Christmas party? And when I showed up, two things had happened. One is that I'd written into the film that somebody played Silent Night on the bagpipes. And the other thing was that I'd said that it was a party for British soldiers. So I showed up, there are all these people who turned up, and I said, okay, so it's a Christmas party, and the thing you do, where you immediately try and bring everybody into the movie. So I'm talking to all these actors who've shown up to do the part with me, and I suddenly realize that I'm talking and nobody is actually listening to me. So I say again, they're singing a Christmas carol, they're singing Silent Night and Blank Faces, and then somebody comes to me, they're Tunisian, they don't... I said, does anybody at all understand English here? And about 4 engineers, Scottish engineers, put their hands up and said, well, you know, we're here, and we know what a Christmas carol is. And then this bagpipe player showed up. We brought in from England, because there were, of course, were no bagpipe players around, and he showed up, and I said, oh, it's great that you're here, and I want you to play, you know, it's very simple, just the beginning of Silent Night. And he said, I cannot play Silent Night on the bagpipes. And he couldn't, he said, you can't play it on the bagpipes, it's outside of the range of the bagpipes. I said, well, you've got to, because so actually, with all this, we talked about the sort of enormous intensity of this moment and the yearning and all this going on. Really what it's about is about a lot of wonderful Tunisian people trying to remember how to sing Silent Night with a bagpipe player who's not at all convinced it's possible to play it on the bagpipes.
No, honey, don't you be late. I'm going to be there when the band starts playing. Remember when we get there, honey.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that no film is worthy of its success, or often worthy of its failure. You know, you somehow, films flit in and out of the public consciousness. The English Patient happened to be out in a year where people had a real appetite for the lyricism and romance and scale of the film. So I was very lucky, and that luck buys you the opportunity to make some more films. You know, people don't feel so much it's a risk to let you go off and do what you want to do. And so I was lucky enough to go off and make another movie on the basis of the success of The English Patient, which perhaps if I hadn't made that film, I never would have gotten made. And the other thing is that actors are more prepared to risk working with you. And so I had a much wider, as it were, opportunity to work with who I wanted to work with. And the making of Ripley was very, very painless. I had great, you know, collaboration from Mirage and great collaboration from Paramount and Miramax again.
Next came the 1999 release of The Talented Mr. Ripley, starring Matt Damon, Jude Law, Kate Blanchett, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Gwyneth Paltrow. Once again, a Minghella film was nominated for a slew of awards and won him the Broadcast Film Critics Award as Best Director, as well as a British Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay.
Dickie Greenleaf?
Who's that?
It's Tom. Tom Ripley.
Tom Ripley?
We were at Princeton together.
Okay. Did we know each other?
Hello. Well, I knew you, so I suppose you must have known me.
Princeton's like a fog. America's like a fog. This is Marge Sherwood. Tom, sorry, what is it?
Ripley.
How do you do?
How do you do, March?
Oddly enough, there are two things to say about the Ripley story. One is that my first play was a play called Child's Play, and not a very good play. I think its singular achievement is that I got to the end of it. But the very first review I ever had of a play was in Hull, and it said, "This young playwright reminds me of the writing of Patricia Highsmith." And I was so taken, because I'd never heard of Patricia Highsmith at that time, so I went out and I bought a book, which was The Talented Mr. Ripley. And I was 21 years old, and I read this novel. Several years later, I was failing to make The English Patient. The movie was on hold, and Sidney Pollack, who'd been trying to help me with The English Patient, called up, and he knew that I was in some financial distress because I'd been working for years on this film and not being able to get it made. And he said, "Look, we've been trying to get you to write something for us forever. We've got the rights to this book, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Have you ever heard of it?" And I said, "Do you know, I think I read that book when I was in my early 20s.
My company, Mirage, we had owned The Talented Mr. Ripley for a long, long time. And we gave it to Anthony to write only. He hadn't done The English Patient yet. He wrote it, we worked on that before he actually shot The English Patient.
What happened, though, initially was that I wrote this first draft and then got very proprietorial, because having started off, as it were, as a hired hand, just filling in while I was waiting to make my baby, The English Patient, I fell in love with this book. And I fell in love with the character. And I also realized that what at first blush seemed to me to be a subject a long, long way away from where I was actually enormously personal to me.
And then he turned the script in and asked to direct it. It was a little bit of an uphill battle because English Patient hadn't come out. There was some resistance first at Paramount. Then, of course, English Patient came out. And they were thrilled.
I felt terribly strongly that for all that Ripley does, that has nothing to do with who I am or what I would do, what he feels, the locus of feeling that Ripley experiences, is something I completely inhabit myself. I found myself thinking, well, in many ways, although I haven't killed anybody, I am somebody very much like Tom Ripley. I've always admired other people. I've always wanted to sit at the feet of somebody I felt was cleverer or smarter or knew more than I did. And so then I didn't want Mirage and Sydney to have the film back. I wanted to keep it. And it was a lot of negotiating and a lot of argy-bargy, as we say in England, went on so that I could become the director of the film as well as the writer.
Silvana was pregnant.
Do you know what that means in a place like this? I'm prepared to take the blame.
What are you talking about?
You've been so good to me. You're the brother I never had. I'm the brother you never had. I would do anything for you, Dickie.
She came to me for help. She needed money. I didn't help. Couldn't help.
Now she's drowned herself, and it's my fault. I'm not going to say anything to Marge, to the police, or anybody. It's a secret between us, Dickie. And I'll keep it.
What Anthony thought in terms of a vision of Mr. Ripley is the film, The Talented Mr. Ripley. It's very different from the original film in the sense that he tried to remain as true as possible to the spirit of Patricia Highsmith's novel, in the sense that Ripley gets away with what he gets away with in a strictly legal sense, but doesn't at all get away with it in terms of his own conscience, if you will.
What I would have to say about the Ripley experience is that I felt in darkness for a long time, in the sense that I have no skin, I don't think, when I'm working. It's almost as if whatever the characters are experiencing, whatever the world is that I'm creating, I have to be part of. And I was so exhausted by the Ripley world, because it's a world of such pain and discomfort, and of this sense of you tell a small fib, small lie, which makes you tell a bigger lie, which makes you tell a bigger lie, and you end up in this entanglement of deception. And I felt like the web of that had sort of surrounded me by the time I got out of the movie.
Morning, Tom.
Morning.
Well, come join us.
Hey, yeah, I want this job of yours, Tommy. I was just saying, you live in Italy, you stay at Dickie's house, you eat Dickie's food, wears clothes, and his father picks up the tab. If you get bored, you let me know, because I'll do it. I think the book was written in the 50s. Some very racy, kind of confrontational themes there at a period of time when I don't think people were really writing about that kind of stuff around that time. And I always am very attracted to the whole expatriate type of storyline. You know, I'm kind of a Hemingway fan, and it has a lot of those same feelings in it. And I love Truly, Madly, Deeply. Loved that movie, so that was really what made me go, yeah, I'd love to work with him. And the part is such a great part, you know, those rare kind of cameo parts that you look for.
I found Dickie's rings.
What?
You have Dickie's rings.
I can explain.
Dickie promised me he would never take off this ring.
Let me put some clothes on and I'll come out and we'll talk about this.
Greenleaf, I got you.
Marge, come,
tell
Marge,
Mr. Greenleaf.
Marge,
I have to tell Mr.
you're being
Greenleaf.
hysterical.
He promised me, I swear, I will never take off this ring.
Shut up! I'm wet, Marge. I've lost my towel. And I'd really like to put some clothes on. Go and pour us both a drink. Pour us a drink.
I was made to look very clever in the casting of Ripley, but in fact, what happened was that I cast the movie, and then suddenly everybody got very successful in the interim between casting and shooting the film. Gwyneth had gone off to do Shakespeare in Love in between when I cast her and when we made the film. That turned out to be a huge success. So John Madden gave me an extra present. My friend John made a great movie and made Gwyneth into a star. Kate Blanchett was shooting a movie called Elizabeth, which nobody knew anything about when I met her, which turned out to get her an Oscar nomination, and she became a huge presence in the film. And Matt Damon, who I have to say is a gift to any director, is absolutely the most giving and genuine and committed actor you could possibly meet. One of the most wonderful people I've ever met. He had he'd made a lot of films, none of which had come out, but I'd been lucky enough to have seen a rough cut of a movie called Good Will Hunting, which he'd written. In fact, at one point I was going to be in Good Will Hunting. They'd offered me a part. Gus Van Sant had offered me a very small part in it, so I'd read the screenplay, and I was looking forward to seeing the film, and I saw it, and I just was so taken with Matt that, again, any ideas I'd had about casting that film were jettisoned by a very, very lengthy meeting I had with Matt in Los Angeles at the same hotel I met Rafe in. I had a very, very similar kind of, what tends to be a kind of love affair with somebody, where you just become intensely preoccupied with an actor and what they might give to the film. And so, in between the casting and the filming of Ripley, I discovered I had this batch of young stars. I also had become obsessed. My wife had made a film called The Wisdom of Crocodiles with a young actor called Jude Law. And while she was making that film, I kept looking over her shoulder at the dailies and saying, who's that guy? What's his name? And he was English, and of course the part was for a quintessentially American boy. And so whenever I sat down and talked about casting, I kept thinking, well, I can't go to Jude Law because he's English and nobody knows who he is. But whenever I thought about what type of person and what kind of glamour and charisma this character would have, I always thought, well, he was my reference. It needed to be somebody like Jude Law. And finally, I thought, you know what, it has to be Jude Law. And I remember sitting with him in Primrose Hill, which is just around the corner from here, and saying, Jude, if you do this movie and we get it right, your life will be either irredeemably or permanently changed. Anyway, it will be altered. And I was so certain that if he was in the movie, he'd become a huge movie star. And so that was, again, I think, a series of gifts to me rather than any great wisdom on my part.
What are you going to do now, Tom?
I don't know. Peter has a concert in Athens next month, so he asked me to come along and help out. He says goodbye. Oh, by the way, he was in rehearsal, so he couldn't...
Why do I think there's never been a Ripley rainy day?
What?
I know it was you. I know it was you. I know it was you.
Marge! Marge! Marge!